So fraud, money laundering, compliance. Why should I care right now? The cash flow's buggered. The world is uncertain.
Well, we do need to care. It's a very important topic. I mean, money laundering's not like armed robbery or murder, right? Where it's very easy to see who the victim is. It's in plain sight. Money laundering is something that it's a blight that goes through society, and it takes away from us. It takes away from us as communities, as businesses. But it's very hard to understand where the effects are, and it doesn't come out until later that we understand how the effect has hit us, and it hits us economically. So we're having $1.35 billion taken out of our economies every year through crime groups, moving illicit funds around. That money could be well spent in other areas of our economy. It could be putting more nurses in hospitals. It could be giving us bigger infrastructure to build small to medium-sized businesses, which are getting really hit now. So it's very important for us to focus on.
So can you break that 1.35 billion down for a little bit? Where's that coming from? The money that's kind of flowing around our economy illicitly at the moment. Where does that come from? How does that work?
Well, it comes largely from tax evasion and fraud. So people that are not paying their taxes and then taking money out of the economy that way. One of the areas that I'm most passionate about is the area around illicit drugs and human trafficking and that kind of thing. That affects us hugely. And it affects us at the very lower levels of our economy with our youth. It affects us in the family environment where we've got adults and parents that are hooked on these drugs, and all the money that comes off the back of that, taking money out of families, goes into these illicit crime groups, and they launder the money and take it out of New Zealand and repatriate it. So as far as breaking it up as a percentage is concerned, I think you'll find that fluctuates, and with COVID-19, it's going to be very interesting in 2 to 3 months' time to see just how much of an impact financial crime is going to hit us as a result of COVID-19.
There's so many things to sort of break down even further there, but I want to touch on you in respect to that, because you are really touching on so many massive things, like you're talking about, the drug trade, human trafficking, that kind of thing. How on earth, and according to your bio, you're driven by the single purpose of protecting our borders and communities from money laundering and fraud. That's a really big goal. How does one get that kind of goal?
Right. One gets it. Well, I'm a passionate Kiwi, first and foremost. I spent a lot of years working abroad, working in big economies like London and the US, and you see it's much more evident there. Things like money muling, where people are used to transfer money through their own bank accounts on behalf of criminals, is very common there. When I came back to New Zealand and fell back in love with my culture and my country, I became very passionate about wanting to make a difference somehow. Did not think it would be in the compliance space. I'm quite the extrovert, and kind of compliance is well, it's dry, right? So, so coming back to New Zealand, I went back into one of the top 4 banks, and we were doing an AML transformation program, and that's where I became educated around it, and I went a lot deeper with it to understand actually how is it affecting our country. Yes, we've got it's a banking thing, but actually what does it mean for a community thing? What does it mean for an economic piece? And that's where my passion really started to build, because these crime groups are using our country as a way to clean money that comes off the back of basically hurting lives, and you can't help but get passionate about that. And when we look at our beautiful, special country, down the bottom of the planet, I wanted to protect that.
Is it like, we've spoken before, and you mentioned that when you're at a dinner party and you mention compliance, people's eyes glaze over.
Do I have to sit next to her? I mean, what are we going to talk about? Compliance. It's really, really boring. But I think Netflix really helped my brand. What I mean by that is they did a really good job with Ozark, right? So when you bring that up and you say, well, have you seen that? And people are like, yeah, I've seen that. The guy that he's the accountant that launders all this money for this great big financial crime group. And I said, well, yes. So my job is to protect New Zealand against people like that. And we're starting to see stories coming out in the New Zealand media now that the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Financing of Terrorism Act has been put in place. And we're starting to see media come through. So we recently saw the quiet accountant down in Tauranga who was laundering money for the Comancheros. And that gang is going to have a huge effect on our communities. They're very well funded and they're very well supported. And they're supported by the biggest Mexican cartel, the Sinaloa cartel. So they've got a lot of money behind them. They've got a lot of know-how behind them.
That's amazing, because I have been binging Ozark, and it just seems so far away. But what you're saying is that things like that have been happening here and are happening here.
Yeah, they are. They are, sadly. And the way we go about protecting our country from that is the legislation is in place, but legislation only can go so far. So the greatest number of businesses in New Zealand are small to medium-sized businesses. They're the backbone of our country from an economic standpoint. And when our legislation came in, I was thinking, wow, I know that big tier one banks are struggling with the complexity of this. How are small to medium-sized businesses going to do this? And how can I use my connections, my background, my experience, pull that together and bring to the small to medium-sized business community, a solution that can help support them through this. And then began a journey 2.5 years ago. Dimension GRC was stood up, which is the company that I founded. And our prime driver was to support small to medium-sized enterprises in their ability to comply.
So you've done that with really easy to use, ongoing kind of cloud software and ongoing support?
Yeah, it's got to be done with technology. It really, really does. So we've done for compliance what Xero did for accounting, which is there are a lot of moving parts and there is a certain amount of complexity. It's not a typical skill set of a director or a business owner. So how do we bring all of those components together into a cloud-based solution so that they can get operational efficiency and effectiveness from it without it being overwhelming? How can they ensure that the customer experience for their customers is a really tight one? Because one of the frustrations with complying with this legislation is you have to compile a lot of data about your customers. And if you look at accountants and lawyers, they typically don't like opening the kimono on their customers, but they're having to now. They're having to really understand what risk their customers pose to their business, and they have to be able to show regulators that they've accumulated that data. So the software was designed to do that and facilitate the process. But as we know, you can't simply just whack technology into a business and say, switch it on, you'll be good. You've got a culture of compliance that you need to build so that your people are aware what the legislation is all about, but also what it is to look out for, because it's not a normal way of operating for small to medium-sized businesses, right? So we started off with the idea of technology and innovation, and that's fantastic, but we've moved and morphed from there, and we've adapted to what businesses are telling us, and that is, we have no idea how to do this. So can you support us? Can you guide us? Can you educate us? And can you also be the person who catches us at the bottom of the cliff if we get it wrong? So all of those pieces we had to put into Dimension to make sure that we were really offering what we said we were going to offer, which is their ability to comply. But ultimately, the bigger moral picture is of protecting our economy.
And in terms of that compliance from a customer perspective, because I don't like anyone lifting the kimono on me, it's a pain in it's a pain in the ass. But how does that? How are we going? Are we? Is all this compliance slowing down the client relation stuff, the getting business done stuff?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question, Andre. Yes, it is. It is. And how are we going? I'll take that question first. So the legislation came out in 2 phases. The first phase was 2013, second phase 2018. I've been primarily focused on 2018 phase 2 entities, which are your lawyers, accountants, real estate agents, high value goods dealers. and they've been reticent around moving forward. We've got the Kiwi attitude of she'll be right, and we've always done business this way, and why should I do it any other way? So it's changing that mentality and reframing the compliance conversation. So that's the first piece. The second question you had was around the customer experience. So now you're having to say to your customer, so what is your source of funds? What's your source of wealth? Can you prove to me where that money came from? Oh, well, it was an inheritance. Okay. Can I have proof of that? So there are friction points, and a reporting entity or director is not necessarily used to asking those questions. They're challenging questions for people. So it's around framing that so people understand why they're having to provide that information, but also letting technology expedite the process so that it's seamless. So you kind of break that friction point down very quickly.
Once we're at that stage and everyone's lifted their kimono and we have a much better understanding of each other, there's more transparency. Have you seen that other things come out of that? Like, is there better service, better businesses being done because we have more of an understanding of our customers and everything about them?
Absolutely. And this goes to the reframing of the conversation piece I referred to earlier. So if I'm talking to a director and taking them through the change process of understanding what compliance is about, you are gathering a lot more information about your customer. You need to understand where their funds are from, or where their wealth originated from. You need to understand how they normally transact, what's their normal behaviour. You need to understand what countries they're going to be transacting in and out of. So you're bringing together a whole lot of data points on a customer. So your ability to really understand your customer, yes, helps you comply with legislation, but then when you start bringing all of that data together, you think to yourself, well, actually, what additional services could I provide this customer now that I know these things about them? How can I upsell or cross-sell? Because I've got a suite of products and services in my kit bag. They've come to me and they've said, I want one. But actually, now that I've understood them a lot better, they could do with 2 or 3. And it's not that you're trying to be greedy. It's actually that the customer experience is a lot more holistic. So when you start working with directors around this, around compiling all of that data and letting that data tell you stories, you can start making some clever strategic decisions that service your customers better. Or it could increase your customer scope. So you could start taking other customer segments into your business. You may find that some of your products or services are a bit outdated, a bit redundant, and you've now got the data to help prove assumptions on that. So it becomes a very powerful conversation then.
Is it tempting for you to branch out into other areas, or do you have to keep quite disciplined and focused? Because you could, like with what you're saying, you could do a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah, I really do have to stay focused, because I'm very easily excitable when I can see that there is added benefit that you can provide a customer. But I've got to remember, and I tell my staff to remember, is our customers in the New Zealand environment are new to this. So don't go overwhelming them with the whole reframe the conversation piece and all the added benefits you can get, because actually we've got to do the simple things right first. We've got to get the foundation right. They've got to get the operational efficiencies and effectiveness there first. When they've got that going, when they've matured their thinking on what risk is, then we can start having those sexy conversations around, okay, you've got a year's worth of data now, and you really understand risk now, and you understand your customers a lot better now. Then we can move into those conversations. I think we run the risk of diluting the core compliance conversation if I'm running ahead of myself with all those value-added conversations.
Now, I'm not suggesting that you're sitting on all of this big data, but from what you've seen, from some of the data that you are seeing, have you noticed any sort of shifts, any fundamental shifts over the last month, say, in terms of what's happening out there in the economy and maybe even people's psyche?
Yes, definitely. People's normal behaviour with regards to how they're moving money, using money, investing money has completely changed. So when lockdown happened, we saw individuals taking huge amounts of money and repatriating it, taking it out of New Zealand and putting it into countries. India and China were the two biggest destinations. Wow. So we saw significant repatriation of funds. Tier 1 banks have put a limit on the amount you can move now for obvious reasons. We've got to contain it. I'm saying to our customers, if you've got a customer who's moving large amounts of money and they're using COVID-19 as a reason for doing that, you need to dig deeper. And it could very well be they're sending the money to the UK to help their children with whatever, because now they're unemployed. It could be completely legitimate reasons. However, criminals are very, very clever, and when they see a loophole, they'll jump for it. So we've just got to be very careful. So we are seeing a lot of different types of behaviour. Financial advisors are having to be very careful around the advice that they give and how people are moving their money. There has been a warning out that please don't touch your Kiwi savers right now. That's another piece where people are having a knee-jerk reaction to the money they've got and how to best use it. So it's important for us to focus. We've also got to take some of the global trends that are happening. New Zealand, it's going to take us a while to see the impact of financial crime in New Zealand because of our size, but we can look at global activity, and we're seeing some pretty scary stuff globally around things that are happening in lockdown. An example would be increased money muling. So people that are under financial stress, they have multi-currency bank accounts. A lot of people have them now. And you'll have people approaching them saying, look, we need to move this money in US dollars into this account in the UK. Can you do that for us? We'll give you 10%. That's happening a lot. What we saw in 2008 in the financial crisis was staff in organisations being approached to move money on behalf of customers. So there's a whole lot of things that we really need to focus on and just be aware of. The conversations have to be deeper. We can't manage compliance in the way we did pre-COVID-19. We have to be a lot more fastidious.
In terms of that moving money around the globe, are you seeing an influx of cash coming into New Zealand as well? Are we seen as a bit of a safe haven?
No. There's not a huge amount coming in. Unfortunately, it's going out. But historically, New Zealand's rated the number one country in the world to do business with, and that's great. Our reputation is a good one, but it also has its downside, right? And if we're the easiest country in the world to do business with, criminals will look at that as an advantage to them. So the Panama Papers were a classic example of that, right? 11,000 trusts set up in New Zealand helped launder that money. That's a lot of trust accounts. So we have to be very careful about the approach that we have.
Isn't it potentially just another revenue stream for us, like the Cook Islands, right? You can have a bit of a component to the economy, setting up trusts.
Well, the money doesn't stay here. We are literally a washing machine. The money goes in, it gets washed, and it gets taken back out. So it doesn't help our economies at all. In fact, it hurts our reputation significantly. Capital is scared of risk. It runs from risk. And in the example of the Cook Islands, they're situated perfectly in the middle of, South America and the US and New Zealand and Australia as narcotic destinations. So drugs are funneled through that region. Their banks are used, small businesses are used, their ports are used. So it doesn't help them at all, unfortunately.
Such a good point to make. It's all well and good being such an easy place to do business, but if our reputation is shot, then it doesn't help in the future.
No, so small countries like New Zealand and the Cook Islands rely heavily on correspondent banking. So countries like Australia, Singapore, UK, US, we need those correspondent banking relationships in order to keep our economies going. And if we've got a reputation for having money laundered through our economy, that risk means that capital flies. It just won't come in. So we have to be seen to be putting best practice into our businesses, into our economies to protect the financial institutions. So we have to do that. And that has to happen for small countries like the Cooks and large countries like the US.
Going back to Ozark, one thing. So with Ozark, you've got these FBI agents that come through. They've got really poor work-life balance because they're so focused on bringing down the cartel. And is that kind of like you? Do you find like the problem is so big that you get so consumed by it?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because when you look at money laundering, people think of the traditional Ozark piece, right? So you've got your very clever accountant who's able to think outside the square, and he's making a lot of money for his family because he's able to clean this money for the crime syndicate. But money is laundered in a lot of different ways. So we've got illicit fishing. So we've got people that go into other people's fishing territories and absolutely rape and pillage. And money is laundered off the back of that. In Africa, there is the wildlife. You've got elephant tusks, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of money laundered out of that industry. Human trafficking, that's not an Ozark, and that's hideous. So there's a lot of areas where I could get incredibly passionate. First and foremost, though, I'm going to focus on New Zealand and doing what I can there, getting a scale and getting our economy to a certain amount of maturity. I have no doubt that in 3 to 4 years' time, I will go into one of the other areas where I'm going into smaller countries and supporting them in a much more holistic way. It's just where my passion lies.
Yeah, when you talk about it like that, it seems so big, and you know, the fishing stuff that's happening in the Pacific. There's massive amounts of resource being pillaged from small communities. Is there any, like, how do we help? Is there any more that we can do to get behind this and to clean things up a little bit?
I think first it's an awareness thing and an education thing. Like with the global warming conversation, it's about really understanding what we can do as individuals and then what we can do as a collective. For New Zealand, what we need to do is we really need to step our game up from a compliance perspective. We really have to get that embedded. And there's a lot of argument that goes, well, is the legislation going to make any difference? Well, if we do nothing, it's only going to get worse. If we build in best practice, if we take the advice of the policymakers that look at these legislations from a global perspective, and we build the rigidity into our economies and we do what we're supposed to do, if we all do our piece, then yes, it will make a difference. We've got to make the job of laundering money so much more difficult. And we can only do that when we embed the technology necessary, but I also bang the culture drum very heavily, because we've got to have a culture of compliance. And we can't always continue with the she'll be right, mate, because we've always done it that way. And, money laundering's never affected us in the past. And why do we have to worry about it now? Well, we simply do. We didn't have to worry about global warming, necessarily 10, 20 years ago. It wasn't a big conversation. But now it's a massive conversation, and it's got huge human force behind it. We need to put the same focus into this as well. This affects our children's future, right? So it's all well and good for us to say that we don't want to invest our time and money in it now, but what kind of world are we creating for our children if we don't focus on this?
What can you explain the leap that you take going from, working with the banks, the corporate kind of security, and then going out on your own? What sort of leap of faith did that take?
That's a really interesting question. I've self-analysed that a bit. I know when I grew up in Muriwai, which is on the west coast of Auckland, and it was a very small town where you married the boyfriend you dated in high school and you had 2.3 kids and a dog, and that wasn't really my thing. I wanted to get out and do something much bigger and go out into the world. I either wanted to be a high court judge or I wanted to be the chairwoman of the board. It's ended up to be the latter. And for me, I have to be driven by passion and purpose. And working in the corporate world absolutely framed a lot of who I am. It gave me the skill set that I've got. It's given me the networks and connections. I was able to travel the world. But now that I'm a little older, I've got 2 teenage children, I really want to be driven by passion and purpose. And that really did mean for me to go out on my own and do things my way. Sounds a little arrogant, but it's I really am about putting people first, putting people at the centre, and corporates don't always have that mentality.
Oh, there's a lot of things to touch on there, but do you think that things are changing in the corporate world? I mean, what we're going through now is going to be a big catalyst for change, I'm sure. But did you sense that the priorities of employees were starting to change, that there was more of a focus on purpose, and will that start impacting the way that corporates are structured?
I hope so, and I think there has been a significant move. My before life was in the HR arena, in organisational change, and I've seen a significant shift in the circa 30 years that I've been in the corporate world. There is a lot more focus on people being the greatest asset rather than, whatever else that, a corporate would focus on. But people are the focus a lot more than they have been. Culture is a much bigger conversation. And I love the conversation of corporates now turning to people bringing their whole selves to work. So corporate used to be every guy wore the same suit, same shirt, same tie, everyone looked the same. In fact, I think it was the Deloitte graduate program where you actually had to go down to a specific place and buy a suit that was the same as everybody else's. Where's one's individuality, personality in that, right? There's a big conversation around diversity. And diversity started off of the conversation of, do we have enough women in the workplace in comparison to men? And then do we have cultural diversity? Now it's moved to the diversity of thought, the diversity of conversation, the conversations we can have around the table being very diverse in their approach, so that we've got a much more holistic way of looking and testing assumptions that we have. So yes, things are changing, and they're changing for the better.
Is it like when you're a kid and you become a parent? Like when you're a kid and you look at your parents and you go, "I'm never going to do that when I'm a parent," and then you find yourself as a parent doing a similar thing. Is it like that when you become the boss of people and do you have to do things and make decisions that you wouldn't have thought that you would have needed to have made?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in the HR world and in corporates, you spent a lot of time working with execs, working with middle management, taking them on a journey. And when you're actually in the hot seat yourself and having to make those decisions, and then you've got the lens of business continuity and making sure that you've got the revenue structures right, and all these balls in the air as a business owner. Yeah, I've had to catch myself a couple of times. Are you being true to yourself here, Janine? Because this doesn't feel right. And when I get those triggers, I do stop. I'm very disciplined. But to your point of did I want to be like my parents, I actually really did want to be like my mum. My mum was a very, very successful woman. So she was my, I guess, my mentor in a way. But yeah, it is easy to slip into ways of working that may be easier for business. But you really do. My thing is all about people. So I've got to keep that lens.
Seeing as we've segued into parenthood a little bit, but what advice would you have for for raising your children to be able to follow their big dreams, as crazy as they might seem on paper, but what sort of environment, what sort of guidance would you give?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I'm a solo parent of two teenagers. I've got a 13-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter. And I remember my mum saying when they were babies, look, really cherish this time because it flies really quickly. And all I could think of was nappies and, throwing up and all the rest of it. And I couldn't, I can't wait until they're teenagers. Now that they're teenagers, it's a completely different thing. And you go from trying to stop them from falling off a cliff to being at the bottom of the cliff to catch them. You've got to let them experience life. You've got to let them test things out. You've got to let them fall over, graze their knees. And as parents, you want to protect them from that. So you've got this duality of protection, but letting them be who they are as individuals, as young adults, coming into young adults. Gosh, I can't believe I'm saying that, but I am. You've got to let go. And as a mum, I find that really hard. My daughter will tell you that. But if they're going to realise what it is they want from life, if they want to be able to articulate their dream, if they're going to have a vision that grows with them, a vision that they wake up with, a vision they go to sleep with, a vision that moves with them, a vision that they can use to pick them up in the hard times and carry them forward, you have to create an environment that stimulates that. And letting your kids be who they are and make mistakes is part of that.
Do you think about succession planning? Do you hope that they might take over the Dimensions GRC empire one day?
I hadn't really thought about it. My son, he wants to be a master builder, so I don't think that's going to be a fit for him. Isabella, she is all about the kind of the planet, and we do a lot of deep sea diving and stuff. And she's all about fixing the coral reefs and going into marine biology. So I can't see any of them going into compliance. But they are very proud of their mother. They both woke up this morning to wish me good luck for the interview. So they're connected with what I do.
How do you, like, if you look back over the last few years, how the hell have you juggled everything, like deep sea diving, protecting our borders from money laundering and fraud, and deep sea, raising 2 children? How does that work? How have you done everything?
Yeah, well, sometimes, perfectly honest, sometimes the balls drop. I'm not Wonder Woman. I'm very resilient. I'm lucky and fortunate to have that trait. I am constantly moving. I'm a very energetic person. But I'm driven by passion and purpose, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. If I don't get out of bed excited, then I'm doing something wrong. And so having a work life that allows me to have a whole and complete family life is extremely important. So when those two balance, when I've got that happening and in sync, it works really well. Do I make mistakes? Have I dropped the ball? Do I sit at the end of my bed and go, oh my gosh, this is simply overwhelming? Absolutely. One of the things I've learned is to put your hand up and ask for help. Don't be proud. Every entrepreneur, every person that has brought up children on their own, whatever the situation that you're in, everyone needs help. We're not expected to know the answers to everything in life, but there are people that we are connected to, or people that can connect us to other people that can show us the way. And people generally love to give that advice and support freely and wholly. So it's a balance of asking for help and taking time out when you need it. Don't burn out. I got close to burnout a year ago. So it's just learning when things are getting tough, what you need to do to step back and refresh and rethink.
Is that a tough thing to do for someone like you to actually to realize that burnout is happening and to take a step back?
Yeah, it is. My family always say they know I'm going through it because they never hear from me. So so it means that I tend to go inward. And so what I was saying before about put your hand up and ask for help is me going through the transition personally of asking for help. And it does get tough, but it's hugely rewarding. And I've got 2 children who I know are very proud of me, and I've got a family and friends who are proud of me. That means an awful lot to me. So that keeps me going. And I just really, truly believe in what I'm doing. So
do you think does the balance or that mix of everything, does that make you, does being a parent make you a better entrepreneur? Being an entrepreneur make you a better parent?
Yes, you need resilience and equal amounts of patience and equal amounts of inward looking and reflecting to get all of that right. And, when you're starting a business, you make assumptions around what it is your customer wants, and you've got to go out and test that and qualify that. Well, as a parent, we kind of think we know it all because we're the parents, but you very quickly realize when you've got teenagers that you don't know it all. And you have to trust in them and yourselves to kind of go through that journey together. So the paths are similar and there is crossovers. So what I learn on one side, I can typically use on the other. To stop and listen. I stop and listen to my customers because that's how I get my service and my products right. I've got to stop and listen to my children so I know that I'm supporting them and advising them correctly. So yes, they do intertwine.
That the assumptions is an interesting concept. Like, how far how far have things shifted from the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey? So you come out, you've got these certain assumptions. Like, how different is the business to what you thought it would have been if it's different?
Yeah. Somebody told me ages ago that assumptions are the mother of all mistakes. He used another ending to that, but assumptions are the mother of all mistakes. So when you're starting a business, you can make some assumptions around what it is that you're offering to a customer. And in the compliance world, when you've got legislation that puts a framework, that's somewhat easier. However, the assumptions, if you run with them with a certain amount of arrogance that you know because you've been here before, you are going to miss the beat with your customer. So you've got to test that out. So I started off thinking, well, what the customers are going to need is what Xero did for small to medium-sized businesses and reduce complexity. I'll put software as a service in. And yes, that was the right thing to do, but the assumption that that was going to be pretty much all I had to do was wrong. And what was wrong is that I needed to provide all of the expertise I have to small to medium-sized businesses so they get it right. So how do I support the director? How do I take them on a journey? How do I show them what a culture of compliance looks like? How do I get them to manage change with their customer? Conversations became much deeper and richer, and for me, a lot more rewarding. Building a product, designing a product's great, but actually connecting with people is so much more fun.
It's That's cool. I mean, would you? There's a couple of things, but would you change anything about that process? Because what I worry about is sometimes we're so focused on making sure that our assumptions are perfect and that we get paralyzed and don't even start anything. Is it okay to go out and make mistakes, but then just evolve?
Yeah, I think with technology specifically, if you don't go to market a little bit embarrassed about what you're putting in market, then you've gone too far. So, and what I mean by that is your customer is going to be the biggest feedback. So yes, test your assumptions, but you can focus group things to death. You can survey things to death. At some point, you're going to have to say to your architect and your developer, go forth and do what you do well. And we'll go out, put it into market, and experience from the customer perspective will then tell us what our next direction is. And that's worked really well. So the 80-20 rule works well in that case. Have I made mistakes? Yes. Have I had a number of aha moments that have been groundbreaking? Absolutely. So they've balanced out.
And there's something really beautiful you said before about the vision being able to carry you through those really tough times. Were there any really dark moments in the journey where the revenue just wasn't there? It wasn't, there was sleepless nights.
Yeah. So I made this decision in 2017, November 2017, to do this. I sat down with my children and told them we were selling our house, that we were going to self-fund this. And it has been a self-funding journey up until now. So as the software has been designed and developed and go to market and all the cost that comes with that, I've seen all the savings that I've accumulated through my career slowly drop. And you go through, it takes a while for a startup to make money, right? So, and we're still not in profit yet. We will be. But there is, so yeah, you have a couple of dark moments around, oh my goodness, if this all falls over, I'm left with nothing. And I'll have to start again. But then, you can't, the greatest regrets in life are the risks we don't take. And I would hate to be sitting in a rocking chair at the age of 80, 90 thinking, oh hell, I wish I'd sold the house and started that business. I'd rather lose everything and knowing I'd given it my all than not to have done it at all. So that's what gets me through those dark bits. You've got to keep moving. You've got to keep walking forward. Even if you don't know where your path is going to take you, keep walking down it, because eventually you'll come to where you need to be.
There'll be so many people now who have been forced maybe out of a career, out of an industry, and they're looking at this kind of future of uncertainty. But they've got this idea, they've got this vision that they've had, but they just haven't kind of acted on it. Apart from everything else that you've been saying around going out and starting up a vision, would there be any other advice that you could give in just pressing go on something?
I think there's a lot of people out there that have got the time to really think about what's important for them. Is my career important? Am I working for the right company? Am I in the right job? Do I actually like what I do? Then there are people that unfortunately have had that process taken away from them because they don't have a job. If you've got an idea, if you've got a passion, if you've got a vision, don't close the door on it. Open that door so much wider, and you do that by connecting with people, by talking to people and testing it out. And with the compliance piece, that's exactly what I had to do, because I wanted to bring to small to medium-sized businesses what the tier 1 banks have, which is access to data. And doing that in a cost-effective way is hard. I didn't know how to do that, but having conversations to bring the vision to life came from other people. And it's like a snowball going down a hill. It starts small, but when it gathers momentum and it collects and gathers size, before you know it, your vision's overwhelming and it's so exciting that you just run with it. And for anyone out there that is thinking of doing it, just feel the fear and do it anyway, because life is about that. It has to be. And in times like this, when we are coming together as families, as communities, as a country, there is a lot of wonderful advice out there. There's a whole lot of incredibly clever people out there that have got the time to put a headset on and talk to you about what your vision is. So take advantage of that right now, because when we go back to the fanaticism of normal life, whatever that may look like, they will go back and focus on what they focus on. So take this opportunity, take this time. There's a lot to be offered, so grab it.
Can you expand on that snowball thing a little bit? So if as you say, you had no idea how you were going to do what you were going to do, but how did you find the people to talk to? What was the process around that?
Well, I was blessed in so far as when I returned back to New Zealand after living in Europe, I went into IBM, and so I was exposed to the tech world in a massive way, in a global way, and with people that are phenomenal thinkers. I mean, IBM is an incubator for people that come up with incredible tech ideas. I went into places like Vodafone that were really, really customer centric, and their whole business model moves with customer desire and customer want, and that's how you stay ahead of your competitor. And then I went into a tier 1 bank, which was all about the banking services, risk and compliance. So I was able to use a lot of the building blocks from my background to create the first cut of the vision, if you like. And I had access to people, really clever people that I'd worked for historically, that were more than happy to help me. And then reaching out into simple things like LinkedIn groups and asking a simple question gets you multiple answers, gives you multiple lenses in which to look through. So that's the snowball effect, is when you start connecting with people, your thinking just starts blowing out, and it's fantastic. But you don't know what you don't know. And so, yeah, I mean, Dimension has changed in its approach significantly in 2.5 years. Can't wait to see what it looks like in 5. I'm so excited.
That's cool. And something you mentioned, Vodafone and the business model shifting to the customer's desires and wants. And when you think about the New Zealand economy, like there's going to be a lot of shifts. So where do you see the green shoots? So if we're just kind of talking broadly, but where do you see the shifts and where do you see the potential for new businesses and new industries here?
It's an interesting question, Andre. I think, sadly, we've got a tourism and a food and beverage industry that's really taken a hit. So there will be a lot of inward-facing passion to support those industries in New Zealand. So the green shoot concept would be around how do we maybe become more local in the provision of goods and services. You can't be wholly New Zealand Inc. You have to have a global lens. But for new innovative ideas, the B2C piece, I think, has a lot of potential, where businesses that work directly with consumers and the things that we can do there around the delivery of goods and services. It'll be interesting. I really think it'll be interesting. We've been very primarily agricultural based. Is there now an opportunity for us to invest in other segments that give us more protection in situations like this? It'll be interesting to see. We're an innovative bunch, us Kiwis, so, it's going to be a great journey.
lot of people are talking about the potential for us to be. I mean, we're an island nation, so we can be more self-sufficient, look at our own supply chains, that kind of thing. But you would know, money moves around the world. We're so interconnected now. Is it realistic to think that we can just close our borders and shut off from the rest of the world?
No, I don't think it's realistic at all. We're a global community, and the globalization technology has absolutely embedded that into our DNA now. For us to become very inward focusing would actually, I think it would cripple us more than anything. And, if you bring together the parts to make a whole, it's so much more powerful. So we're talking about, when we come out of lockdown, what are the first economies we're going to connect with? Australia being a logical one, the Pacific being a logical one. So coming together and being able to support each other and help each other through the change that's coming ahead is very, very important. I don't think that we can become inward focused wholly. I think it would be bad for us.
Yeah, and in terms of, like, you, as part of your work, you mentioned the Pacific and Africa, and I think there are communities, there are regions that depend on our support as well. So it's kind of a sad thing if we kind of shut things down and forget about everyone else.
Yeah, no, I think it sounds selfish to do that, right? I mean, if you've got the Pacific Islands that are largely tourism based, rightfully or wrongfully, because I think tourism's also had a negative effect for some of the economies as well, but they are largely tourism focused. A lot of people make their money out of the tourist industry. That's had a huge effect on their economies. If we were then to become more inward focused once lockdown is over and we're going back to business as usual, we're going to see those areas of the global community really suffer. And I don't think that's in our DNA to do that. They're part of our whānau. They really are. So, you've got to reach the arms wider than just your country.
And for you, have there been any shifts? Like, has there been any kind of shift from this experience, the working from home? Will it be different for you going forward in terms of how you do business, how you prioritize, how you work with staff?
How I work with customers, probably not. Because I'm a startup, I was working from home largely anyway. I do have shared office space in Auckland, so I can feel connected rather than attached to the laundry, which can happen when you work from home. But I think when I'm working with customers, no, I don't think that'll change. I think what has changed for me is not so much me as a businesswoman, but me as a mother and a member of a family and friends, and continue to be more connected, because you can let life take you away from the people that mean the most to you because you're just simply so busy. Busy is one of these arbitrary things that we love to tell people that we are, but we should be busy with each other.
Are you saying that the social distancing has made you more socially connected?
Yes. But having said that, one of the first things I want to do when this is all over is shake the hands of a stranger and hug a friend, right? So, yeah. But it makes you, it's given me the time to reflect about how important friends and family that I have are to me.
It's pretty amazing. It's such that busyness thing that you talk about is a fascinating thing. Like, during lockdown, you look at the motorways and there's no commute anymore. But a lot of people are still really productive, but they're spending time with their family and connecting with friends via Zoom. So you kind of realize that maybe there's a whole lot of busyness that doesn't really do anything.
No, correct, absolutely. And that whole the old view that I don't think you're being productive in the workplace unless you're in the workplace. I can't see your productivity. Productivity is not necessarily a tangible thing. So I think the lens that's happening through COVID-19 for corporates now is they've had to let go of that productivity argument. And their people are working remotely. They're still doing a great job. They're still connecting with customers. They're still providing services. So the reframing of that now is if we're really going to own that conversation around work-life balance, that's going to be something that changes, I think. I think there's going to be a shift around people's ability to be able to have that better work-life balance.
Was that something that you had to grapple with your staff, and just kind of trusting them to be productive in their own terms?
Yes, well, we've opened up our help desk. And it's not typically a paid service for our customers, but in COVID-19 we realised that people that weren't customers, that had really manual-based processes, that were still working with customers and trying to understand how their customers are now behaving, they needed a place to call, to connect. And so we opened up our help desk. And so trusting that people, that staff were there to do that and available to answer the phone and providing that service that we promised New Zealand that we would offer was important. And it's happened. And it's great.
Brilliant. Now, one thing, and this is probably more of a personal thing for me, but one thing that I've been really conscious about doing with these interviews is kind of balancing out some of the negativity as well, and rightly so. There are a lot of people that are going to lose their jobs. The economy is taking a hit, and then you've got the health side. But can you talk about some of the optimism, some of the silver lining, some of the the potential that you see in the future?
The potential I see is the way we connect as people. I think that has changed. I see, like, there was something on Breakfast TV this morning around complaining, and there's a 21-day challenge that you're not allowed to complain because it's like bad breath. You can tell when someone else has got it, but you can't. You're not necessarily aware when you do it. So it's actually, how do you go through life being a lot more optimistic? And I think that optimism is something that we've got to take on in a very powerful way. And so I see there's a lot of potential to reframe the way we look at things. The planet is going through the worst crisis ever. People are dying, people are really sick, people are losing their jobs, economies are going down, companies are going down. How do we how do we focus on the potential that comes out of that, the human potential, the way to reframe the way we look at our home lives, our work lives, our communities, giving back? How do we not complain, and how do we smile? How do we be grateful for what we've got? That's what I think where the potential lies.
Beautiful. All right, one last question, and it involves a question to others, but as we go through and we talk to other business leaders and founders and entrepreneurs, what's one question that you'd like me to add?
One question I'd like them to add. That's a good one. I liked your question. I've heard it being asked as, what do you think the meaning of life is now that we've gone through such significant change? And for people that have such a kind of global vision, it'd be interesting to understand all the different answers behind that. Your question earlier of what are the potentials that you see for New Zealand, I'd love to see some. Rod Drury put out a piece on LinkedIn where he saw a huge amount of potential for New Zealand and how politicians could be involved in helping bring this to life. Continuing those conversations, understanding that would be, I'd love to hear the answers to that.